All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Joan, roll call.
Director Hockert.
Here.
Director Kelsenberg.
Here.
Director Lauer.
Here.
Director Petrie.
Here.
Director Porbeni.
Here.
Director Thielander.
Here.
Chair Sherman.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance carefully.
The hardest thing to do today.
Right? Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, tonight we're going to start with our consent agenda. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. Oh, approval. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda first. And can I get a second? Director Petrie, all those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda passes. Now I'll go ahead and make a motion to pass consent. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Great. Director Hockert with the second. All those in favor of approving tonight's consent agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda passes. All right, under our first agenda item, we have strategic direction A. Ensure the learning process is adaptable to meet individual student needs. And we're going to start with Superintendent Funk with a back-to-school report.
Good evening, everybody. So, first thing I want to touch base on, is it's been in the news quite a bit lately, is our status with school resource officers in the district as we started the school year. Stillwater Area Public Schools has a unique situation, different than many districts in the state, in that we have 3 school resource officers who all come from different jurisdictions. So Stillwater Middle School, they provide, the resource officer there is provided by the Stillwater Police Department. Here at the high school, the resource officer is provided by the Oak Park Heights Police Department. And at Oakland Middle School, it's provided by Washington County. I have the good fortune to tell you that all 3 jurisdictions have chosen to remain with their contracts with the school district, so we still have school resource officers in place. And so I've had some conversations with folks. Our principals have had conversations with the officers in their buildings, and, you know, I think they're just, they're going to be careful, but they feel that they are comfortable with the change in the law and the direction provided by the Attorney General, and that they are, as of today, we still have school resource officers, and I expect them to continue. So I think that's a real positive thing for our students in our community throughout the district. Second, I want to give the board and the public an update on what's been happening with transportation. Over the summer, we severed our contract with a transportation planner who was a vendor for the last few years for the school district, who would plan routes and communicate with our bus provider and with families. Primarily, we severed that contract because they weren't local. So we would have maybe changes we'd want to make to the bus routes, and we'd be talking to somebody somewhere else in the Twin Cities who didn't really understand the local routes and what we were talking about. So we chose to bring it back in-house like it had been for a number of years, and we have had some transition issues as that has occurred, and as a result, we have had some delays in providing transportation to folks, and we've been working through it. We've got a number of people within the central office who are stepping up to help out, and we expect that most of these issues should be worked through by the end of this week. So, but I want to just thank the public for their patience. Again, we believe in the long run that we will be more responsive to community needs when we complete the transition to local providers, or local planners, I should say. Third thing I want to give an update on is food service. We're seeing hundreds of more students that we're serving within the school district. I think I heard 300 was from somebody the other day, who are now at the start of the school year, already receiving the free meals. So that's a success. If the more the kids are eating, I think the better they're going to be in the classroom. So we have free breakfast and free lunch. The breakfast is not kicking off quite as fast as the lunch, but I think that will increase as time goes on. Also wanted to just make a comment on the Ready, Set, Go conferences. A lot of positive feedback from families and staff on that. Gives really teachers the opportunity to get to know the kids before the school year starts, and it gives the families a better opportunity to meet the teachers. So a lot of good things happening there. Finally, it's a good news, bad news story. The bad news story is that Kyle Kane, our principal at Oakland Middle School, has left, and he is taking a administrative position in the St. Paul School District. But it's an opportunity for someone else in the district to step up. So Ann Giardino, who previously was at Stillwater Middle, and then this year she was briefly at the high school as an assistant principal, is now going to transition. I think today was her first day at Oakland Middle School. So it's good to see that we can, have people step up and lead in new positions in the district. And it's a great opportunity for Ann, and I think the building's really excited to get her. She spent about 6 weeks there a couple of years ago in an interim capacity and really impressed the building. So we're excited, and we're looking for good things, and we wish Kyle the best of luck. So that's what I've got this evening.
Any questions or comments for Superintendent Funk? Great. I'd just like to reiterate to the public, thank you for your patience in the transportation. It's not an easy time, start of school, and having transportation influxes, no fun. We've all been there, probably, and so thank you. And I'm very grateful to hear about our SROs, because I know that's something I'm hearing about a lot in the community, so thankful to those organizations for staying in. All right, let's move on to our next agenda item, and that is elementary MCA results, and for that we'll have Caleb. Come up.
So I will, before Caleb gets into this, I want to start out by stating publicly that what you are about to see tonight is a reflection of the systems we have in the district to support our students and support our teachers, to support our teachers to meet our students' needs. And so I talked to the board a number of months ago about different systems we have in the district. And this report is really an indicator of those systems or lack thereof. And so I will share this with you for 2 days, and I want to give thanks to the principals here. For over 2 days last week, myself, Caleb, and members of his team in teaching and learning met with each principal for an hour to review their data in their buildings. And we had some pretty frank conversations about what's been happening in this district. A takeaway that I got from it, and Caleb's going to cover some more of these in the presentation, is, well, this is the first time we've really done this. That a lot of our principals have been here a long time. And so my point of emphasis with the board, with our administration, with our teachers, is we are not here to determine, whether or not teacher A, B, or C is teaching to the test. That's not what this is about. What this is about is an accurate description of we're going to show you the results of what we have been doing. And if we align our systems, professional development, curriculum, adherence to the standards, if we align these things, teaching our teachers how to work with a more diverse population. If we can do these things, then we're going to start to see results in what we do. But if we're not adhering to anything, then we're going to get more of the same. You know, and final thing I'll say before I turn over to Caleb is, a few weeks ago, I sat in front of you, and I talked about the churn that we've had in the district and how it's impacted things financially and within the HR world. I will also state to you tonight that what you are going to see are some not good results, which is a direct result of the churn we've had in this district. So it's easy for me to come in here in a year and say, okay, yeah, financially, we have to improve. Academically, we have to improve. The proof will be what systems we put in place to align what we're doing to better meet the needs of our students. And that's why I think you hired me as your superintendent. But the first thing that we need to do is we have to identify the reality of our world, and that's what we're going to do tonight. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Caleb?
Thank you, Dr. Funk.
And Caleb, just so I'm clear with the board, how do you want to do this? Do you, because I know that the board does have questions, do you want to do the whole presentation? Do you want us to ask questions on a slide-by-slide basis? How do you want us to
So
do?
the presentation is organized around representing math, or subject area data first within the MCAs, and then there's an overview slide with some of the systemic issues that we've identified and opportunities for improvement. So perhaps if we take questions on subject areas at the end of the subject, if it's about the data, we can talk about the data. If it's about the things that we're doing and the plans that we are putting in place, we'll leave that to the end, perhaps.
Okay. Does anyone have any issue with that? We'll just wait, so we'll hear reading, we'll go subject by subject, and then at the end, kind of a mix. Great.
So yeah, so tonight we're taking a look at MCA data. I think in years past, we added in FastBridge and we added in NWA from the previous year. This year, we are focusing solely on the MCA data, recognizing that the other data that we look at are much more for internal use to make plans in the short term with individual students. But MCA, as Dr. Funk mentioned, is an impact of the system that we have in place. So as we begin, let's take just a quick look at who our students are. So on this slide, you'll see the demographic breakdown of our elementary. So tonight's just elementary students. We'll take a look at secondary in a couple weeks. So we have the Minnesota breakdown of demographic data. Next to that, in red, you see Stillwater as a whole district. And then you have the individual buildings. We did break out Amigos Unidos, so you can see what Amigos Unidos looks like, knowing that those numbers are also in the Lake Elmo. So they're duplicate there, which is why I kept the columns the same color. And then we also have Gate, our two sections of Gate included here as well. So a couple areas to highlight. You know, I was just curious where we have larger percentages. So for our Asian student population, we have Brookview and at Gate at 10%, over 10%. For our Black or African American students, the largest concentration is at Brookview at almost 18% of the student body. For Hispanic or Latinx students, Lake Elmo certainly is the largest, and within the Amigos Unidos program, K-5, we see a large 26%, over a quarter of the students are Hispanic or Latino. The data that we're looking at with MCA is just grades 3 through 5. So I do know within Amigos Unidos, there's a larger percentage of students in K1 and 2 who are Hispanic or Latino. Multilingual learners, we used to refer to English learners, but recognizing the multiple languages that our students come from, recognizing them as multilingual learners. This is a change across the state in language that we're using. Brookview at 9.5%, Lake Elmo at 10.4%, and Amigos Unidos also the largest percentage in the district at 13.5%. Special education, Lily Lake is our largest concentration. They do have specialized programming there as well. And then for free reduced price meals, Lily Lake, Lake Elmo, and Brookview are our three largest schools. So moving on to the data. So first we'll take a look at our MCA reading. So what we have here is a screenshot from the MDE report card. So this data is fully accessible, public data. Anyone can access it on the Department of Education's website. If anyone does go on there, to replicate this, you would need to select all students being tested and all accountability tests. So there's a few different ways that you can filter data and look specifically. So this includes MCA students who took the MCA 3, as well as the MTAS. MTAS is a test given to a very small percentage of students based on specialized individual education plans, special education. And so we can also filter data based on those students who meet all of the accountability criteria based on enrollments, when students are part of the school district, when they might have left, to keep it simple. And so we can actually go backwards and look at prior to COVID data. We kept all students being tested. So depending on how you filter data, you may see slightly different numbers appearing. So what we can see here with MCA reading at third grade, we see a continued decline from our initial COVID decline, and a slight drop from last year. If we look at fourth grade, we see a bump up. You may recall we talked about a bounce last year. We had a nice little bounce going into 22, and then into 23 we saw a decline, a 3% drop. And then for fifth grade reading, we maintained an increase. So we saw a bounce, and we continued that momentum at fifth grade. So 69.9% of our students are proficient there. I like this graph because it does put the state in comparison, not so much from a specific data point in a year, but rather what are the trends that we're seeing across a wide body of students? How does our data replicate, what does it look like in comparison to multi-year trends across the state? So you can see in third grade, similar kinds of trends. At fourth grade, we're not on pace with the state. The state dropped, but not as much as we did. So that's important to note. And the opposite is true at fifth grade. The state continued a little bit of a decline, and we maintained our bounce. So on the next slide, we'll see.
Can I just interrupt? I just have a question about that. So, I mean, there's a big difference between 50% proficiency in third grade and essentially 70% in fifth grade. So how can we explain that? Does it go back to the pandemic and the time frame in which certain students didn't get the sort of instruction that they should have gotten? Or how do you, what explains that?
My initial response is these third graders were kindergartners when COVID happened, right? They were kindergartners in the fall of 2019. And so they had a significant portion of their time, all of first grade, interrupted. Second grade as well, if you remember in 2021, 22, the year before. We had the masks in place, we had distancing, we had some online instruction. So that would be my first initial response, was these students have been severely disaffected from COVID from the earliest years. And our response, we've added measures in place over the last 3 years, so we anticipate the younger students, the second, third, first, and kindergarten students will have different scores moving forward with MCA. That's my first blush. However, when we turn the page and we can see trends from year after year after year, you know, in 2019, pre-COVID, we were at 58.7% proficient. So I'm not gonna, we can look at pre-COVID and say, we were not performing as well as we should have been even then. So I can't look at this and say it's just a COVID piece. I think that has impact and relevance, but it is not the only thing that we're taking a look at.
Curriculum, I'm sure,
Correct.
is a huge piece of that,
Very much so.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
So on this slide, we see the same data, the same information, but organized a little bit differently so we can look at cohorts of students. So looking at that current fifth grade group, that would be the very bottom right corner. You see that 69.9%. Last year, that cohort was at a 58.5% proficient. The year before that, that cohort was at a 51.9% proficient. So that cohort of students has their percent of students who are proficient on that year's MCA has increased.
I
Same-
think it's important to note it's a different test.
It is,
Okay,
it
if you go-
is.
So go back 2 slides. Or 1 slide, sorry. All right, so if you take a look at third grade statewide proficiency, never above 60%. Okay, fourth grade statewide proficiency, never above 60%. Fifth grade, look at the state proficiency. So it's a different test. So when we're comparing students from cohorts from year to year on a different test, statewide, students do better in fifth grade on the test than they do in third grade. So I think that's an important factor for the board to be aware of, that there is a change in the test.
Yep, and so we can see that on the next slide. So we have the state next to Stillwater. So you can see the same relative progress. Now, I would say our Stillwater students have outpaced Minnesota's, right? If you look at from third grade to fourth grade, that is a 1% increase, whereas we saw a 7%, 6.5% increase. Same thing from fourth grade to fifth grade. We saw a much more significant increase, but Dr. Funk is correct that the specs of the test are different. So we see the same within from third grade to fourth grade, our current fifth graders, so last year's fourth graders, we see an increase above and beyond what the state of Minnesota as an average saw. So if you want to turn to the next, yep. So now here we're looking at MCA reading data by students, student group, student demographic group. So what we can see here are some significant gap increases, specifically with our Black or African American population and with our students with 2 or more race designations. So we see from COVID, pre-COVID, 2018-19, in our Black or African American group of students, we saw a 16-point drop. And similar 16.7% for our students with 2 or more race designations. We did see some significant increases in gap closure. So if we look at our Hispanic or Latinx population, they have decreased the gap and increased their proficiency 8.5%. Our multilingual learners, 9.7%. So within here we see, and we'll see these trends across the different subject areas. Our Hispanic or Latino population and multilingual learners are increasing, and some of the other groups, specifically Black or African American, are decreasing.
Caleb, while we're on this slide, do you anticipate that those 2 areas, those also happen to be the largest percentage in our Amigos Unidos program? Is that, have you looked if those correlate at all?
I have not pulled out the data to see what impact it would be if, but yes, we do know that 26% of our Amigos Unidos population, K-5, right? If we're looking at 3-5, it's a little bit less. So I'd have to pull the data to really understand what impact that would have. I would say also we have increased staffing in our multilingual learner program. So we have more teachers working with this population of students. We also have identified some resources that they've been using in this area. So I think it's more multifaceted than Amigos Unidos, but that certainly has a role within this data.
A positive role or?
A positive role, yes.
Yeah, this slide was depressing for me to look at. This was particularly painful. So I'm sure we'll have questions on this as we
Right.
move forward.
Well, and it's With the exception of those two, all groups had a pretty significant decline. You know, we can look at the Asian group of students at 6% drop, white students at almost 8% drop. So it's across the board. So as we talk about these data are representative of our system, there are systemic components that we need to take a look at.
And I will say, when I was looking at this data, I had the operational plan next to me too. And based on just kind of similar to what Superintendent Funk said, our operational plan is in large part spot on with what I saw here, because with the cultural competency and the focus on that in our operational plan. So just a comment that I observed.
All right, so we'll move on to the next one. So now here we have MCA reading percent proficient by building. So we can see the multi-year trends across all of our elementary schools, as well as Amigos Unidos. I did pull them out separate so we can look at that, as well as GATE program. And so here we can see that, I want to look for some of the good news. You know, we can see that at both Lake Elmo and with our GATE program, our 22-23 performance outpaces and surpasses pre-COVID numbers. So if we look at Lake Elmo in 2018-2019, they were at 54.3% proficient. In 23, they were 62.5% proficient.
I'm going to stop you there, Caleb. So I think what Caleb just highlighted is leadership matters, okay? I think Lake Elmo, top to bottom, has teacher leaders, principal, okay? We are meeting the needs of our kids, and there is no COVID excuse at Lake Elmo, okay? It is, we need to get into the classrooms and figure out what systems we need to put in place. And so, as you can see, they are currently within reading 8 points ahead of where they were before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So when we hear the churn on a statewide basis and we see on a nationwide basis, okay, kids aren't learning as well because of COVID, et cetera, et cetera. Leadership matters, folks. And I think you're seeing it in what's happening at Lake Elmo.
The other school that I would highlight would be Afton Lakeland. As we look, we see an initial drop from 70.7 to 52. And from that point, we have 2 data points that successively increase. So we see some trends there. And we'll talk towards the end, right? Both Lake Elmo and Afton Lakeland participate in the BAR program. So there's a hyper focus on data that has been there for multiple years. So those are some specific components that may be speaking to this data. We can also see growth from last year. So there was an initial drop, another drop, and then some bounce up. So Afton Lakeland, that's certainly true for them. Anderson Elementary, and we'll see low scores here, and there's no excuse for that other than we have systemic pieces that we have to address. But we are seeing some increases. So at Anderson, there's a 3% increase from last year. Lake Elmo again, Amigos Unidos, GATE, Lily Lake kind of maintained a 1/10 increase, technically an increase, but not as significant as some of the other schools. We also have some grade levels at specific buildings that performed above the 70th percentile. I highlight the 70th percentile because that's approaching on our scorecard where we want our students to achieve. Our goal, certainly is 100%, knowing that 80% is where we hope our students create a new baseline. So as we look at schools that are over 70%, we see both at GATE, we see 5th grade at Brookview, we see 5th grade at Amigos Unidos and Stonebridge, Lake Elmo, and Afton. Moving on to math.
Well, do we want to stop here
yeah.
and let's do some reading questions? So we can break this up.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Director Kelsenberg.
So these test scores we're comparing against Minnesota, is that as far out as that test goes, or is this a national test?
MCA is only Minnesota. Yep.
All right, and then do other states, are they similar to Minnesota? Actually, let me ask a different question. Who defines proficiency then? And has that changed at all in the last 50 years in this state?
So the MCA, Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, MCA, came into the state in the mid-2000s, like 2003. I'm looking around my colleagues somewhere. I don't have the exact number, but replaced the basic skills tests and some other things. So it is a Minnesota-based test. We are on the third edition, so it's a third set of standards. And so we'll be entering an MCA 4 round in a couple years. So this is MCA 3. It is only Minnesota. There's no correlation across other tests that states give. Some states, the tool we would use would be the NAEP. You sometimes see that in the news. It's an 8th grade, 4th and 8th grade test, and it's designed specifically to test states. So we wouldn't necessarily use that as a comparability because it's only one building and a couple grades and a couple. I think I lost your question. I
Yeah, so the other
apologize.
part was who's defining
Oh.
proficiency?
Yes, so that is the state. The state puts together the test specs, the standards within that, and then they go through a scale setting process with that new test. And so they identify the different cut points at which students would receive a does not meet or a partially meet standards, or exceed standards. So they set that bar, and those numbers then are used for these purposes. So for us, proficiency is defined as students who meet or exceed standards on the MCAs.
I had a question. Did you get yours answered? Sorry, go ahead. So we know that our curriculum and our teacher professional development has not had maybe good systems in the past. Can you please detail for me, like, what's going on with maybe instructional coaching? Do we have any positive results? If you're working with an instructional coach, your classroom is performing better. If you're trained in letters, you're doing better than someone who is not. If you're using Letterland and Words Their Way, kind of some of that curriculum that we do have, your scores are better if you're doing that with Fidelity. Can you speak to kind of that issue?
I can speak anecdotally to some of it. So we don't have a large population of teachers who have gone through the letters implementation. We have a handful of kindergarten and first grade teachers who've gone through volume 1 last year. Some of them, all of our interventionists, well, we have some new ones who need to go through it, but we've had interventionists and coaches go through volumes 1 and 2. We've a handful of teachers at sporadic grade levels. And so that likely would not be reflected in our MCA scores because of the grade levels. Most of those teachers are at the K1, some 2. There are other grade levels, but, and what we have found more than anything else is the level at which our teachers are able to speak to and reflect on what their students need to learn in relation to foundational literacy skills, phonics, phonemic awareness, being able to articulate what they're seeing in their students, to look at data and to make those changes. That's, I would say, what we're seeing a difference in. You know, we could, I wouldn't certainly do it in a public setting, but there are certainly some grade levels at some buildings where some staff have that training and their scores look very different from peers. And so that will be not only an impact of the READ Act, but something that we would be looking at doing anyway, is providing all staff who teach reading with science of reading training.
Okay. And I think for me, it's just about how do we find out, we spend budgetary resources on these programs. So how can we identify what programs are working, what training is working? And so while I appreciate that we don't maybe have enough to have this, robust group, I would like to have some information on return on investment in terms of letters, instructional coaching, the curriculum we do have, and it's frustrating to not have some of that, to try to draw some correlations. So I don't know about how the rest of the board feels, but when we have that information, I think that would be important for the board to see. Yes, Director Porbeni?
Thank you. So I'm looking at the growth trends, and we can see here that the multilingual learners and Hispanic Latino students were the only ones that had positive compared to the others. Is this the first time that's happening? And if it is, why do you think that those two groups, the multilingual learners and Hispanic Latino students, why do you think they, for some reason, succeeded, but the other groups is a huge decline? There's something to be, there's something there that I think that we need to pay attention to. Because this is the first time this is happening. And so if the trend is actually trending downwards for the others, and the two groups here, something right was done there. Have we looked into that?
So I think that's an area for continued reflection and digging into the data in deeper ways. Like I said, my initial reaction and thought would be to look at, especially with our multilingual learners, as a system, they comprise 3.8% of our population. So it's a small subgroup to begin with. And so with small subgroups, you can have variability in scores. Their scores were also quite low. And so it is, sometimes with where the scores are low, there's easier to see, and small populations, you're able to target resources a little bit differently. Especially as we added additional staff, both through ESSER funds and continued maintenance. I think when in the fall of 2020, I think we had 7.4 EL staff across the district. And this year we're at 10. So it's not a huge increase, but when we talk about the ratio, we have about 300 students in the program now. So we were able to address some of the specific needs that our students are having, especially we saw an increase in staffing at Brookview specifically to go with the increase of students that they were seeing.
So can I just follow-up question
yeah.
to that? So if language, of course, with the EL staff, so if language was a positive in this case, the others are actually English speaking. So what do you think might be the problem there? Because you have a group that is, the language skills are actually developing, right, because of the addition of more staff. And then you have the group that actually speaks English, not doing well. Why do you think? I'm just.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and unfortunately, I don't have solid answers to be able to give you, say, this is exactly what's happening. I would love to. But I think it's there's multiple factors that are probably at play within the programming that we provide, within the supports and resources that our students receive, the ways in which our with engage with students. We've talked about engagement quite a bit over the last number of years, and so with that, I think about our action cards and our district direction, right? So as we think about and build those out, how are we engaging with our students, with our families, reaching out? It's not just a reading thing, right? It is, how do we engage? How do we create relationships and deepen those connections that then do have an impact on the academics?
Any other questions? Yes, Director Lauer?
Piggybacking off of that, looking at Lake Elmo specifically, the Amigos Unidos program is still built into those numbers, correct?
Yes.
Under the proficiency?
Lake Elmo includes Amigos Unidos, yeah.
And so, so obviously that group, the Amigos Unidos group, performed exceptionally well, thereby raising the Lake Elmo numbers. Okay. So, again, there's something there, there's some sort of,
Yep, I mean, you can
Connection.
look at Lake Elmo and see the average for the school, and then where Amigos Unidos comes in, pulling the average up. And you'll see that in reading, and math and science. So that does have a factor to Lake Elmo scores, for sure.
and so maybe,
But they are Lake Elmo students, so we
Right,
keep
right,
that,
yeah, absolutely. But, and then there's, so maybe there's that,
Just try
maybe
to
it just
do
shows if you focus on it,
Mhm.
what do you know, you
Right.
get some results.
Right. Well, and again, that program specifically, where students are, all students, not, you have a very targeted and intentional approach around language and developing the skills in Spanish, and then also in English. And so there's an attention to the standards, there's an attention to data, there's an attention to collective responsibility with those students that I think is playing out in some of the positive scores that they're seeing.
Could you also theorize that perhaps because it's a school that you have to apply to get into, that there's maybe a increased in parent engagement, knowledge of systems, structures? I mean, they're seeking that school out. Have we ever?
I think that's something that we could certainly explore. I do know at our lower grade levels for the last 3 years, it's been a lottery system to get into the program. There's some sibling preference and some other pieces that perhaps elevate the older students, but that would be something that we could look at. But I think when I look at the factors within our control, and when I reflect on those teachers who, the collaboration that they engage in, the data orientation that they engage in, this focus on standards, those are the components that we have control over. Those are the factors that we know from research that make a difference in learning, and we're seeing the results play out.
Well, and I was just gonna say, I mean, I'm just looking at your data, and these are the kind of hypotheses that I do like to talk about, so we can get to some resolution and answers. But Amigos Unidos and GATE are by far our lowest free and reduced lunch schools. So is there something socioeconomically kind of going on in those schools that could be at play here?
Yes, I mean, if you were to look at you look at any sort of nationwide data, ACT results, et cetera, the biggest indicator is the wealth of the family, on how well the kids are gonna do on that test. So absolutely, that's very consistent.
Yes, Director Petrie?
I was going to ask this at the end, but maybe I can, this is probably a good time to do it. So I know that we do have other assessments in our schools, like for instance, Fast Bridge and WEA. And those kinds of assessments are geared to allow teachers to sort of see what the gaps are with individual students so that they can then help them, bridge those gaps. Whereas MCAs are essentially a snapshot of how the district is doing. So my question is, do the MCA scores line up in any way with the FastBridge and NWEA scores that you see?
That is something that we need to analyze. There was a correlation study that was done a couple years ago that suggested the national 40th percentile is the number at which you're at low risk of not meeting standards. And so that's the number that we've been using in the district to identify release from intervention services or inclusion in tier 2 interventions. And so we need to analyze, or I would like to actually go to the company to ask for more recent correlational data that's more expansive than simply Stillwater. I can run a report on Stillwater this year, 500 students, it's a large number, but to do this type of statistical analyses that I think are necessary, we would need to reach out to the company. I do have questions on that. I think, speaking frankly, I think without confirmation, 40th percentile is probably too low when I'm looking at the numbers. But our numbers are too sporadic to be able to pin down at what point, you know, our 50%, if you have X score, 50% of students exceed or meet standards or exceed, and 50% do less. There's a lot of variability within our current data set.
Okay. Yes, Director Thielander.
You know, I think as we try to put all this data into context and make decisions around this, you know, I would imagine, you know, participation in MCA is probably not going to move the needle enough to make a difference. But just for our own understanding, you know, how much of impact would that have? It probably wouldn't jump 10%, but, you know, the MCA on the fact sheet talks about the importance of participation, and the more students, the better and more accurate the data is going to be. So how should we put that into context? Does that matter? You know, because that could be understanding of other causes of social emotional well-being, you know, anxiety of students coming out of COVID that we, you know, need to be addressed from that standpoint. So
Yeah.
any thoughts on that?
So I think it would be much more impactful. Opt-outs impact the secondary scores, especially high school, much more. We have a larger percentage of students opting out at secondary. At elementary, it's far fewer. I did run some numbers just to see, kind of comparing, because there's no way to really tell, but based on FastBridge scores, which again, correlate or not, they would suggest it did not have an impact.
Yes, and Director Porbetti.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm gonna go back to the multilingual and the Hispanic Latino students. I think personally, I know we come out here every year and we always have issues with our numbers. And we talk about ways to try to resolve or, you know, rectify some of those gaps that exist. Lake Elmo, usually, it's not at the top. The last couple of years that, you know, these numbers have been presented to all of us. But today, there's a difference there. Something is happening at Lake Elmo. And we cannot remove the efforts of the teachers in making this happen. In both of these two categories, the Hispanic and the Black students were always the lowest, every year. And now we see a difference there. And you add in the past, people will ask, what is the use of Amigos Unidos? And now we're seeing a trend. So there's something that the teachers in this program are doing. It's COVID. It is more difficult when a child is transitioning from a traditional language to English, unlike English to a traditional language. Yet you have a group of students here that have performed above what normally we've seen. And I really want to encourage us, and hopefully we will see some of the solutions in terms of how we can make these changes, because the numbers here for the other groups are quite disturbing, and we all agree that that's a problem, right? But we also need to recognize these two groups that have done quite well. And so the question again for me is how? We really, I think we should look into it. There's something that they did that is putting them up there.
Yeah. So I would go back and again reference the population of ML students at Lake Como is the largest. Brookview is next, but in terms of elementary, a large concentration of both multilingual learners as well as Hispanic and Latinx students attend Lake Como. And so I think exactly what Dr. Funk had said about the systems that school has put in place, recognizing, in some of our principal meetings, Principal Gordy had mentioned some of the changes that they had put in place even before COVID, recognizing some cultural shifts that were happening in the building, engaging in conversations with staff, engaging in conversations with community and parents, then are bearing fruit now, right? Engaging in the bar program, a number of years ago. We're seeing fruits of that now. Engaging in coaching Their instructional coach is the most senior coach in the district currently, and has been in that position, in that building for a long time, creating relationships, engaging staff in high-quality PD. So you can look at all of those different systems in that building. Those are the things that impact the work there. And you know, I don't think I broke down, I certainly don't have it here on the slide, but demographic student group increases by building. You know, yes, Latinx and multilingual learners are large there. Makes me think I want to go back and check how are all of the other groups doing there. But I know the systems in place that they have there, those are the systems that we've been working to replicate and build out.
Well, and we also do know that based on our special programming reviews, that Amigos Unidos does get some resources that are above and beyond what our typical student do receive. So I think an analysis of how that may be benefiting them would be helpful. One of my questions was on preschool. Do we have any correlation yet on what preschool does to these scores? Anything that you can?
Yeah, I don't have that. That would be
Okay.
a little more time to be able to put that together.
Okay, because I do think it's important when we have preschool in our buildings and we're looking at building buildings and expanding. I mean, I can tell you Anderson only has one preschool building. Is that a factor? I mean, only one preschool classroom. So when we have a bond that's going to build a bigger Anderson, they can have more preschool. Is there a correlation if we can get more kids in our preschool? Are they on the curriculum faster? Are they getting what they need? So I mean, I think that there's something there that needs to be done too with getting preschool more available.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, so that will be something that I can bring back to our team to look. That becomes a little more difficult because we're talking third grade data and for pre-K students 4 years previously. So what impact gets lost over time, that would be a question that we would need to explore in addition to that. All right.
And then my last question was, do we know best practices at schools, that things that are working? How, and are there plans, and how will those be replicated in other buildings?
Can we hold on to that one to the end? Okay. All right. Moving on to math. So in a similar way, we're seeing the same kind of data. Where's my note with all my slides? There we go. So at third grade, you know, we see a drop. We had the bounce, and then we see the drop. At fourth grade, we had the bounce, and we kind of continued. It's a slight increase from the previous year, and at fifth grade, it's low. Let's be frank about that. It's low, and it's kind of sporadic from year to year in the last 3 years. So I certainly have some ideas on why that is. If we turn the page to, we see the same kind of data where we can see the same numbers, but on a cohort basis, again, we see a drop from third to fourth, both in district and in state. We see the same kind of drop, much more significant in Stillwater from third to fourth to fifth than we see at the state. But we do see similar drops. I did check some of the schools that we use for comparability purposes, and you know, I see the same kind of drops at many other schools. So,
Just a point, this is the reverse order of what we just talked about with reading. You know, the reading tests seem to be more difficult for kids in third grade. The math test is more difficult for kids in fifth grade at this point. So it's just, again, we like to compare, okay, well, they're doing better in third grade, fourth grade, fifth, okay, but it's a different test. I think that's very important for people to be aware of.
yeah. And we see that both in the state and at Stillwater if you look vertically. So, math by building, oh no. Math by elementary group. So again, we see a significant drop in our Black and African American group of students from pre-COVID. They actually grew post-COVID, but from that pre-COVID number, we have a 12% drop. And again, it's nice to see a little bit of an increase year after year after year, but when we're talking sub 40% proficient, we know there's work and systemic efforts we need to address there. Also low but continued improvement we see in our free reduced price meals population. But again, it's pretty low to begin with there. We do have a couple groups, same two groups that we saw before, that are performing better than their numbers in the year prior to COVID. That would be Hispanic or Latinx, as well as multilingual learners. So they are performing better than they did in 2018. By building then, we see some of the same kinds of trends. Performance better than pre-COVID is Lake Elmo, increased from 55% to 61.6%, with, after that initial drop, continued increases. Well, I shouldn't say it bounced. But they're certainly continuing to perform for the last 2 years better than COVID year. As we look at Afton Lakeland, we see, again, that initial drop, and then pretty consistent and sustained and impressive increases year after year after year, from 51 to 62 to 69.5%. And then we can also see just an increase from last year. We can look to Lily Lake for a pretty significant increase from one year to the next.
Just so I understand, the Amigos Unidos and Lake Elmo are separate here. Lake Elmo does not include Amigos Unidos in this data.
Lake Elmo does include Amigos Unidos.
So you have Amigos Unidos as a school at
Yes.
66. Lake Elmo is a school at 61.6. That includes,
Yep, so Lake Elmo includes all students who are enrolled at Lake Elmo, including Amigos Unidos. To understand where Amigos Unidos comes at, I was able to pull them out separately. But they are Lake Elmo students. So we can look at the data and say, there's about a third, roughly a third at these tested grade levels are Amigos Unidos. You can see where they pull the average up in both last year and this year.
so can we get a look at Lake Elmo without Amigos Unidos? Isn't that something you could pull up?
We can, I don't have it here, but
Okay. I think that would be helpful.
And how big a percentage of the school population is Amigos Unidos at Lake Elmo?
so we have, I don't know the exact numbers, but we have 50 students at every grade level except for 4th and 5th. So I would say it's roughly, Mark, half, a third?
40%, I don't know, 40 would be ballpark.
Right.
So sort of an outsized impact on the school itself.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, good to know.
Again, we have some highlights at specific grade levels and buildings. Again, both Gate School, or Gate classrooms, Afton Lakeland, Amigos Unidos, Afton Lakeland, Brookview, Lake Elmo 3rd grade, Lily 4th, Lake Elmo 4th. Again, using that 70% as the threshold to get on the slide. But we do have that 80% at Afton Lakeland at 3rd grade. So I would certainly highlight that, as well as Gate. For the most part, Gate students have high scores to get into the program, and so
Yes.
I'm not surprised that the numbers are approaching 100%. But
Yeah.
at Afton Lakeland is significant.
Yeah, the gate's kind of for me duh.
But it's not 100, so I want to
Yeah.
make sure that we don't forget about Gate and include them in our reports. We haven't included them in years past.
Stonebridge is missing.
Oh, it is.
Is it?
No highlights.
There's no highlights. There's not a grade level above 70%. So. Science.
I'm going to
Okay,
go to
before
a
we
math
go-
Oh,
question.
sure, yeah, yeah.
We're
Yeah.
going to stuff at math.
Um,
Go ahead, Director Petrie.
So, you had mentioned earlier that you have some ideas about what was happening with the 5th grade math
Yeah.
score.
We have a slide on it, so.
Pardon me?
We have a slide on
Oh, you
it.
have a slide on it,
Mhm.
okay. Because I'm just sort of wondering, were those kids missing some really fundamental math facts
Yeah,
kinds of
that's
things
exactly
during
it.
COVID? Is that, okay?
No, not just COVID, but
Curriculum.
we'll
Okay.
talk about that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have a
Alright.
question, and there's no politically correct way to say this, but as a board responsible for governance, what is going on at Anderson Elementary? because their scores continue to slide even after getting extra support last year. And so for me, as a board member, that's a school I'm gravely concerned about.
Yeah, so, as a school, they were identified in the North Star.
Yep.
And so they've been, over the last year, working with a group to help address some of those issues. And it was specific to specific populations of students, I believe. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. And so we can look at the turnover within staff, specific to special education as well, as we look at specialists, as we look at the impact that some of those have, not just in those subject areas, but the community as a whole. I don't have specific notes on buildings per se. I will say that all buildings have engaged in this data, have been engaging in the data, Anderson included. Even in June, we had early access to this, and so we've been organizing action cards and school improvement strategies around this work. And so even this morning, all principals shared out what their action plans, what their strategies in alignment with the Pony Plan and our strategic planning. And so we have, at every building, identified literacy, specifically literacy, goals and areas of focus, strategies for improvement, ranging from letters training to deepening our swim and MTSS processes, to looking at some of those, committing to continuing to look at data to dig deeper to figure out why things are the way they are. Attendance, I don't have a data on correlation between attendance, but that was one of the factors that impacted the North Star. You had to have a significant number of students missing 10 days or more in order to fall through the different levels of North Star. And so looking at attendance, looking at engagement, looking at high quality instruction, all of those things play a role.
Okay. That doesn't really give me specifics, and I would like to.
I don't have specifics
right.
on that building for you.
It's a concern, and I think that it's probably, I would imagine, a concern for everyone at the board table to see Anderson, because they were getting help last year. So I'm assuming they're going to be identified again, or if they're not already.
It's a multi-year identification.
Okay, so they'll continue to get support.
It's every 3 years is
Okay.
when they run the calculations for inclusion on that list.
Okay. Under 40% was shocking for me, so I just,
Yeah.
I don't know at what point we could do that, but I would love to know more about school improvement plans there and how things are being worked in and how it's going to be addressed. Thank you.
Moving on to science. So we see that increase from the 21 to 22, and it dropped again into 23. So similar kind of story that we're seeing. If we flip to the next slide, we can see, and we have another slide with some years on it, but we can see our student subgroup populations. Again, Hispanic, Latinx, multilingual learners, and in this case, students with 2 or more race designations saw some increases. Again, you may recall our conversation 2 years ago around multilingual learners where 0% of the students were proficient. To now jump to 34.5% is a significant increase. And I think specifically to some of those strategies around social, oral, and academic language that those students are focused on, having a contribution there. Again, we see Black or African American group, significant decline, Asian subgroup decline, white subgroup decline, special ed, and free reduced price meals, all double-digit decreases. And then the 2 highlights there would be GATE at 100% and Amigos Unidos again at 72.2% proficient in science. And again, the science test is only given at 5th grade. It's a 5th grade, 8th grade, and after taking biology. So fewer students, fewer grade levels engage in that.
Questions on science? Yes, Dr. Linder?
What's a realistic timeline for the new science curriculum to take full effect and have a positive impact?
I want to say immediately, right? I mean, that's the goal. We know that can be an implementation dip when we're talking about a new instructional program. But when I'm looking at where our science scores are at right now, especially within groups, having a new curriculum focused on collective implementation with the professional development, with the assessments that are built into that, with the expectations that are put in place by principals, by teams themselves, by teaching and learning. I think the simple engagement in a structured approach to science is going to bear fruits. It is the new standard, the new curriculum is more oriented to the new standards, but there is certainly overlap with those standards. I would expect to see some increases based on the increased, when we look at the instructional minutes of elementary schools, we increased the number of minutes expected for science to make sure it covered the new curriculum. And so we'll be having more science being taught in our schools using a more structured program with more support. So I anticipate some significant increases.
Are the new standards reflected yet in the MCA test?
Not
Or-
in the MCA. That test will come online for Minnesota in the spring of 2025.
Okay,
But we wanted to implement
Yes.
early so that, so that this year's fourth grade students have 2 years under their
Correct.
belt. So again, that test is only at fifth grade, and it tests standards from third, fourth, and fifth. So fifth grade students are accountable for learning conducted in third grade.
got it. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Gordon?
Thank you. So I've been scratching my head. What is the correlation between the curriculum and the decline in the scores? Because a change in curriculum alone is not going to make any difference. If the kids can do well with the previous one, they won't be able to do well with any new curriculum that comes out. So what, because I know we always say curriculum, what is the correlation there?
For me, it's not about a new program. A new program doesn't necessarily provide the change. What does is the intentional focus on that program. So as all teachers are implementing the new science curriculum together, as we're providing coaching supports, PD supports, as we're providing trainers from the company to come in to help guide the implementation of the different units, those are the pieces, and the organization and the energy that puts into that to change practices. That's what bears fruit in student results. You can see, and I could perhaps point to math as an example of this. When those math standards came out in 2007, these are old standards that we're still dealing with. 2007, a lot of districts shifted to math expressions, which is our math curriculum, and they saw significant increases in their scores because of the curriculum, but the attention to the implementation. And so scores shot up. I don't know what our scores look like. I'd have to try to do some research on that. But sometimes you do find, as the length of an implementation increases, a curricular drift, where teachers start drifting away from the materials as they're designed, start finding other resources that they think are going to be more impactful. They may be, they may not be, but you lose some of that system cohesiveness through that curriculum drift. That is something that we want to prevent in the future. And part of that is inconsistent access to professional development, ongoing commitment to collective accountability in those areas is a factor. So I think there's as we look at curriculum, it's not the textbook in front of students, but it is all of the background work to prepare the teacher to engage the students in that work.
And are we saying that's not happening right now?
I'm saying with science, we have that new curriculum, we have that focus, we have that collective accountability.
I'll
to
answer that.
science.
All right, so there's multi-components to this, all right? So professional learning has to be consistent. It's not. We need a curriculum aligned to the standards. Okay, we're finally getting one. We need to have assessments. When we talk about, okay, preparing kids for the standards, all right, are the assessments we giving accurate? If they're not accurate, okay, how do we know that kids are really learning? We have systems in place called collaborative action teams, professional learning communities, okay? We provide a lot of time through QComp and money into those teams. Are those teams, are their meetings aligned? Are the people who are leading the meetings, are they focusing the teams in the right areas? Do we have enough time, A, not only for instruction, but B, for our staff throughout the year to circle back and do professional development? And then the last thing that we have as a district, and this board is committed to, is instructional coaching, all right? Are the teachers who need further assistance, are they getting it? Are the instructional coaches that we have within the buildings, have we provided them the proper strategies? Are we consistent about the implementation of the coaches throughout the district? So I just went through that list of 6 things, and we are all over the place. Okay, we do have professional learning communities, but are they completely aligned? Not yet, okay? We have new curriculum, all right? Do we know if the assessments are aligned? Not sure yet. I think they will be with the new science curriculum, but we also have a lot of curriculum in math and literacy that is older. So it's not you're absolutely right, 100%. If we buy a new curriculum, okay, great. That's not going to be just the solution on its own. So it's a multifaceted approach to really improving to meet the needs of the kids.
Thank you. I appreciate the response there. Because, whether we like it or not, the scores, this is a problem right here. It's the worst I've seen compared to the last few years. Even groups that normally have performed so well are not. In all area, whether it's math, reading, you name it, science, it's a problem for us. And so, we are seeing groups that normally haven't performed well before, performing well. And so that's why my question here is, if those groups are performing well, something was identified in that area that is causing those groups to perform well. So we do have a solution somewhere that we are still not yet tapping into. There's a lot of things, all that you have mentioned. I'm sure there's parent engagements as well. There's that cultural competency that goes into that. But for all the other groups that are not performing well, if we have a decline in groups like the Asian population, the white population that have always performed well, and all of a sudden they're going down, and we have the black population that's gone down and continues to go down, that's a problem right there. And then we have a multilingual and the Hispanic group coming up, that's a plus. But these are the GATE program, these 2 programs have shown some real good support system, and it's reflected in the result. But again, it's leadership. Something is happening at Lake Elmo that is creating the difference that we see today. Lake Elmo has always been the school that has always been, when the scores are shown, Lake Elmo is always at the bottom, right? Something has changed. And I think we really need to look into that. Because when we talk about curriculum, most times we say curriculum. All over the last couple of years, we've always said curriculum. But there's nothing to support. It's always been, we need to have a new curriculum. Curriculum is not going to change anything.
Right.
You can bring the best curriculum, and if the strategy in terms of how we apply that doesn't change, it's not going to change. Our kids will continue to suffer. So I think for me, we really need to look beyond just the curriculum. It's always been, I understand what you're saying. I do understand what you're saying. But pushing curriculum as the reason sometimes, the expression of those different areas. So it is the application, how do we apply it, that it meets the standards in which we're all looking for. But it also includes parent engagement. It includes cultural competency. It has to be really intentional. We've spent money. You said it's all over the place. We spent money on trainings. We continue to provide supports in different areas. The curriculum is here. We've, proposed a lot of new things that teachers could actually, that could empower and build the capacity of our teachers. But you just said it, it's all over the place. So we need to probably come together and really look at critically what those differences are, because those numbers there, is a lot of effort that it's not showing. And I'm concerned, because if you have the groups that have always performed well, not performing, how do you expect the other group that normally we don't talk about the cultural part of it or some other reasons why they're not doing well? Then the focus goes back to those. So we really need to look beyond a lot of things as to why that's happening. It's concerning for me, not only as a board member, but also as a parent.
So I was gonna say 4, there's probably more than that, things that I can think of at Lake Elmo specifically. When you talk about the work that they've done around BAR and the attention, and I will say it's not BAR, it's the attention to data and responding to students' needs and acknowledging their strengths. So that's a component. The attention to collaborative action teams or the professional learning communities where teachers are digging into their students' data and responding appropriately to that. That's what that work looks like. So when we say professional learning communities, it's not a book club to look at new instruction. It's actually digging into their students' data and making collective changes. It's about having staff that are representative of students, right? I can think of, because of Amigos Unidos and because of some of the paraprofessionals there are people there who speak Spanish, who can engage with students, who have different types of relationships with students. We can look as well at, like I mentioned, the instructional coaching, right? All of these pieces play in. When we look at the number of staff who have engaged in letters, there's a number of students, our teachers from Lake Elmo who have done that. There is a culture of learning, a culture of attention to standards and attention to data that's playing out. When Dr. Fun talked about leadership, that's how that plays out. And that has a positive impact on all students, and sometimes it targets specific students as programs emerge within a building.
Can I ask, PLCs, I think I had heard this one time, I don't know if it was as a community member or a board member, but that PLCs would be beneficial, or teachers had requested that it's usually a building that meets with a PLC, like that it's just like 3rd grade or 4th grade. Do we do any cross-building PLCs where other buildings that, I'm looking for ways that you can share those best practices, or do we do that right now? Because I don't recall.
So our focus and we're changing the focus, we're referring to them as collaborative action teams. And so at the heart of it, it is a group of teachers that share students. And so that's why that part wouldn't apply out to multiple buildings, because as a group, they say, here's a group of students who have this need. How do we reorganize them in our classrooms to provide for their needs? And so they're able to take a look at, let's say there's 100 students in our grade level. We all own those students. They're all part of our classrooms. We all take part in their instruction. So it's not my 25 kids and your 30 kids and your 30 kids. And so it's developing the systems to have the shared common assessments, the shared focus for improvement, and identifying the various needs that the classrooms have. Now, on a professional development day, we can certainly bring a grade level together to say, what did you find successful? What did you work on? And we want to be able to do that with some of our professional development time. Right now, this year is designing and building out this new collaborative action team structure. It's not something that has existed previously. We've given templates to guide their conversations, ways to look at data, ways to change their instruction that has not been part of the system before. So we're building that out then we're able to then share across buildings what that work looks like.
Can you take a minute really quick? And I know you're going to go through some of these, but I really have a question about principal teacher evaluation process and school improvement plans. For the benefit of the board at our level, can you talk about what goes into that, how this goes into that, and just how that process works? Is that something that we could, if we need another learning
I
session?
think we need a
that would-
learning session
Okay,
on that, because
that would be
it's,
great.
I don't have the data and the information to really speak well
Okay.
enough to that,
Okay.
to speak how
I did
that-
send you the questions on September 1st, so I just want to be, no, I didn't just surprise you, so
Right,
just for the
right,
community,
right.
these were all questions I
Yep,
submitted in
yep.
advance. So let's get a work session then, if that's something that the board would see benefit in, kind of how that process plays out at a school level. I think that's some insight that we would benefit from.
Okay, so some systemic issues that we've identified, curriculum, yes, being one of them. But I will say, specific to curriculum, we have addressed foundational literacy skills at kindergarten and first grade years ago. Second grade came on board with Letterland, and based on these scores, we see we need to increase that focus on phonics instruction at third grade. So we will be bringing Letterland to our staff this year. I believe our training is coming up here in end of September, so that we'll be engaged in Letterland to address the phonics instruction that has been missing, and specific word study.
So can I just, so Letterland was only in first and second?
It started before I came in kindergarten and first grade
Okay,
only. And then it was, we were using Words Their Way, which is not a phonics program. It's a word study, but it doesn't dig into the detail of phonics and the science of reading in the way that we needed. So last year, we brought second grade, Letterland to second grade, and this year we'll bring it to third grade. At fourth grade, you'll see some of the test scores dropping, and one of the areas is a unit of instruction that I believe it came to us as an online component, and it kind of, I don't know how it happened, but it essentially was no longer part of instruction, as staff didn't have access to it, or things went with COVID, some units stopped being taught. So it was a detail and synthesis unit that was part of the units of study that hadn't been included in instruction. When you dig into the test specifications, when you look at the number of standards and benchmarks that unit covers, we have to bring that back. And so Sky Hoekstra was able to recreate the information, provide the links in a system that all staff will have access to. And so principals are aware of this. They will be working with their fourth grade to make sure that this unit is included in their instruction. Similarly, there was a poetry unit that was taught after the MCA test. It can't be after. There's a significant portion of the MCA with poetry on it, and so that unit was brought forward in the scope and sequence and pacing, and it was beefed up a little bit as well to meet the needs that we have. So those two components, it's an example of curriculum that was missing or misplaced that should have immediate impact through instruction. At fifth grade, we can see that significant drop. But also we know at fifth grade, the textbook, the materials that our students are using is not aligned directly to Minnesota State standards. This is an old text that we had purchased many years ago when the new standards came in. I don't know the copyright. I do know it's out of print, so we can't get Spanish versions and we can't continue to add. So it's a textbook. What happened with the 2007 standards, math standards, is there was a shift. And so a lot of content moved from sixth grade to fifth grade and from ninth grade to eighth grade. Those were the two big years where you saw a significant shift in algebra down to the next grade level. And a textbook was purchased for 5th grade that was different from the materials that are used at K-4. This resource certainly addressed some of the 5th grade standards, but has a large component of current 6th grade standards in it. So with this text, we were over teaching 6th grade standards, even in the fall units of 5th grade, teaching 6th grade content, and under teaching 5th grade standards. And so recognizing that this is not appropriate, we worked with 5th grade teachers. Amy Fisher, our math coordinator, worked with 5th grade teachers to take a look at the units, to pull out all of the 6th grade content, so we're not focused on 6th grade, we're going deeper into 5th grade. We identified another resource that MDE references, illustrative math. It's a free online resource that teachers are able to access and build that in aligned with standards. We also worked with them, there's another resource from MDE called Testing 123 that helps you understand what the standard is, what the kinds of questions are being asked on the MCA, so that you can make sure that your curriculum and the kinds of questions that you ask are in alignment. So 5th grade teachers went through the whole textbook, went through illustrative math, went through that Testing 123 to revise their scope and sequence and pacing to address the 5th grade standards in a way that needs to be done. Again, a structural issue, it's curriculum, but it's deeper than the book. It's how we actually use it, how we break it apart, how we pace it out, and how we then instruct students. We talked about some of these other systemic issues. We talked about the lack of professional development, especially the sustained support for curricular implementations as we move farther away from their first year. That also speaks to the lack of adherence to district-approved curriculum, that curriculum drift that can happen. Inconsistent use of instructional coaches, making sure that coaches are in buildings to participate, that staff reach out to them and engage that work, that coaches push in and support that work. I do remember a couple years ago when we had lots of absenteeism, COVID related. Coaches would have to fill in and provide sub coverage. That takes them away from coaching, right? That's part of that lack of access and inconsistent use, or performing other duties as needed or as assigned. Staff turnover, right? In some buildings we have seen a significant turnover, as well as substitute teaching and staff absenteeism.
Do we have, because if you have this on here, the systemic issues, do we know how our fill rates are, if they're above average, like where we're at with the staff absenteeism? Is there a reason why it's on here this year and maybe hasn't been in years in the past?
Well, I think it's certainly, I would say, indicative of 2000, 2001, and 2001, 2002, where we had significant absences due to COVID, shutting classrooms, shutting buildings down, some of that. I don't know what the rates look like now.
Can we get that information?
I don't think they're bad right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
we're early in the year.
Okay, early in the year.
And I can tell you, the rates, absenteeism rates have gone down in the past. As the further we get away from COVID,
Okay.
the less of an
Yeah,
issue
so it's
it
not
is.
something that's a huge issue at this point.
Right.
No.
So areas for improvement. More collaboration with teachers and administrators around data. That takes the form of that collaborative action team that I talked about. It's part of our BAR program for sure, which I don't think I'm stealing any thunder or lightning, but Oakland Middle School was approved to be a BAR school, as was Brookview. And so we'll have additional supports for those buildings, organizing around data. And not just looking at data, but what are we going to do differently instructionally with students in front of us on a day-to-day basis. That new science curriculum, again, not the curriculum, but the ways in which you organize our collective efforts around it. We'll be engaging in a curriculum review process with group of teachers looking at literacy. We will be recommending new instructional materials for K-5 literacy. The scope is yet to be determined, but we will be bringing a recommendation forward for implementation as soon as feasible. And that is in alignment with the READ Act that I talked about in policy, 621, I think we started looking at. And the last on this slide would be to ensure that our teachers are trained in letters or the science of reading. So that's in alignment with the READ Act as well. I mentioned it before. I'll be communicating again directly to K-1 teachers, but we'll be engaging all K-1 teachers in letters training this year and next, as we then also identify how to support the remaining teachers required to have science of reading training by 2027. Additional areas for improvement, commitment to that standards-aligned instruction in math. We know that, like I said, the standards are old. Standards have not changed in the last, trying to do the math, 2023 now. They came out in 2007. It's been a long time. The standards haven't changed. Our materials haven't necessarily changed. What we need to do, because we saw growth, we saw improvement in our scores, we saw those be effective, we need to continue using our existing resources and bringing back to alignment in those areas.
Can I ask a quick question? Quick
Yes,
question.
go ahead.
So, quick one, just a quick question here. So if the standards have not changed, why hasn't our style changed? So even if you have the standards with respect to curriculum the way it's always been that way, why didn't we change the way we apply or we teach the curriculum? Because it's not an excuse for us to say standards haven't changed, so for that reason, it's impacting the way, the scores in this case. We know that, so why haven't we changed the way it's applied?
So I think what I would want to explore is how we have moved away from components of the curriculum. So one of the components within math expressions are these manipulative kits. And even Holt had some components that really took the abstract concepts of math into a concrete physical way of using it. Those manipulatives are additional materials in the classroom. They take additional time to set up, pieces get lost, and so on. And so I would be curious to explore how deep we continue to use those to help students conceptualize what the math looks like in physical form. I would also want to look at the various tools that come with that program. There is the program is designed to spiral. So you learn something, and then in a few weeks you come back and you learn that again. One of the ways in which that program spirals is through the resource called Homework and Remembering. And so how are we using that resource to ensure that the concepts spiral upon themselves? The main textbook is another workbook, the student activity book. How are we using that within our classroom? So I have questions on the actual implementation of that curriculum that we had and how we might have need to come back to the core elements of that make it a research-based effective program. Speaking of math, so much of our focus is on literacy, and rightfully so, it needs to be there. But we also know we have a need for tiered interventions in math. And so when we're able to use math, we do have a Bridges Math Intervention Program in all of our schools that interventions can use, but it's about really decreasing the number of students who need literacy so we can increase math. We want our interventionists to be trained in both reading and math so they can flexibly adapt to the needs of the students in front of them. We need to work on and revise an academic calendar to provide more opportunity for professional development. We'll be sharing an idea, Dr. Funk will be sharing an idea on that later. working with building leadership and teachers to adhere to the standards to create that collective accountability towards the important work that we need to do. And work with HR and teaching and learning to improve the onboarding process, to increase employee retention, and I would add to continue that ongoing support of implementation of curriculum with our new staff so that they get more touch points with a coach or with a teaching and learning coordinator throughout not just the 1 year, but multiple years so that it becomes part of daily practice. So with that, I would ask any questions, any more questions?
Great. Yes, Director Petrie.
So I know that there's certainly some attitudes out there that think, by people who think that we do too much testing of students, too much standardized testing. Do you think that people don't take the MCAs seriously? And I'm talking now about students, parents, teachers. Do you think that that is a factor here?
Again, I don't have the detail on motivations of students and of parents to be able to correlate, right? We can look at grade performance and how does that correlate to MCA or opt-outs. We can look at NWA or FastBridge data to try to make some guesses on how opt-outs plays a role. Ultimately, I would need to connect with other districts as well on that.
I'll
I just
answer
don't,
that.
I don't think we have the data.
I'll answer that. I think grades 3 through 5, you have pretty accurate data. I think kids, they want to do well. I think parents aren't opting them out. I think it's an accurate reflection of the system. I think when you start getting into middle school, I think you see more of an opt-out rate, and you really see it at the high school level. So, in a few weeks, we're going to be presenting secondary data to you. I think the middle school data is still valid, that we're going to be showing you that is going to have some opportunities for the district. I can't say the same for the high school data. I think there's, just from having done this a long time, the focus on kids at the high school is ACT, PSAT. It is, I hear so often from parents, this test is meaningless to my child. They're focusing on stuff that can get them ahead in life, and the MCA doesn't matter to them anymore. So, but I really think at the elementary level, I think it's a very good indicator of our systems and what we're doing.
And I think and I appreciated, I think last year I went back to a slide that we had where it's like, what is the MCA, what isn't?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it gets misrepresented sometimes by people who aren't in education, where it's not really supposed to be taken at an individual student level. Is that accurate? I mean, it's more of, Dr. Funk, it's more of what you're saying. It's a measure of system alignment to standards. It's not really,
We
can
see how
this
individual
student-
students do on it, but
Right.
it really, it's a measurement for the district, on our systems.
Right, and I think that some people take that one test one day and say, that's, a student can read, or can't do math, or can, and based on my own research, and that's not really intended for any kind of individual student.
I think the other thing that we have not mentioned yet tonight that is extremely important for people to be aware of, and again, the focus tonight has been proficiency. The other thing that, again, this could be a future topic, is what is the growth of our students? All right, so if our students are starting behind, say you have a third grader who's reading at first grade level, and at the end of third grade, they're now reading at second grade level, or second and a half grade level, all right? There's some success there, okay? So we have to be able to identify students where they're at coming into the system or at the start of the school year, and then measure growth targets, and in a perfect world, we would be able to impact our growth targets, so in a couple of years, they'd be able to catch up. We don't talk, right now, we're just talking proficiency, but I think student growth is another really significant thing that we should be looking at.
I absolutely agree. Yes?
Thank you. I've been pretty quiet this evening, just trying to absorb everything and listen to what my fellow directors are saying. And first off, thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough, and I know that we are all committed to looking at the academic achievement of our students, and this felt like it was right on target with that goal. The information and the data that we received was hard, and I appreciate that it was honest and it was all right there in front of us to kind of digest and pick through and try to better understand where this is all coming from, hopefully with the intent to grow and improve going forward. Because ultimately what I see time after time in the math and the science and the reading is we need to do better for our kids. And for me, the hardest piece was the achievement gap and how striking that was across the board in all of our data. So that for me was a really tough pill to swallow. And I hope that, and it sounds like the work that is already being done is recognizing that and trying to move forward and address those issues. I guess how I am processing and trying to make sense of all this is what new things can we do, but also, as you were mentioning, there are things that we have curriculum, that we have things in place that maybe we need to dust off and kind of rediscover within our closets or desk drawers or wherever to hopefully reuse stuff that we already have, but also dig in and follow the science and the new research that's coming out on how kids learn. I feel like the pandemic, of course, is a big issue, and it still is and has an impact on our kids in our district. I think we can't lose sight of that. But at the same time, it as Dr. Funk said, it's not an excuse. There are definitely groups that are succeeding despite the pandemic. So to me, that gives me a lot of hope that with the right systems, with digging into the data and understanding the importance of tests like this, which as a former educator myself, I have a complicated relationship with standardized testing, to be perfectly honest, as I think many educators do. And kind of looking at this as Chair Sherman was talking about, as this is looking at the whole system, and Dr. Funk as well, and not necessarily just digging into individual teachers. I mean, it can be used in that sense as well, but looking at this is an analysis of our whole system and what systemically can we do to shift the needle. And to me, looking at this data, we really do need some big shifts in how we do things. And there are some things that were mentioned, like the calendar with more PD days. I'm already thinking back to the schedule, potential schedule changes for getting kids, our older kids sleeping later, our younger kids getting up earlier. I mean, those kind of research-based initiatives and strategies, I am open to looking into, because we need to just put all the cards on the table at this point to really get things back in order. So this was a little unsettling, but I still have hope that we can get all our ducks in a row and horses in a row and continue forward. So thank you for all this. And I guess my final question would be, is there anything else that the board can do to really support this work? Because a lot of it is going to be happening at the teacher level, at the principal level, the interventionist level, but is there anything that we're missing as a board to really support the work of improving all academics for all of our students?
I would say contact your legislator. And when we're looking at literacy and the approved new curriculum that is going to be established by the state, we're going to need a significant influx of dollars to pay for that, and not just Stillwater, but districts throughout the state. So as you know, the legislative session comes back in February, I think that's going to be something that will be really impactful for us. The other thing at the legislative level, I mean, you heard talk calendars and professional developments, but allow districts the autonomy to do things differently than the system of, the agrarian system we've been stuck with for 100 years. So again, I mean, those are board level, legislative level issues. But I think that's significant. And really, hopefully, we will be able to have your support for continued professional development, continued updating of our curriculum as we move forward here. And I think the one thing that we need is just some stability with you as a board and with the leadership in this district, because this took us a while to get here. We're not going to change it overnight, but we do need to put, I mean, you saw some incremental small steps that we talked about tonight, but it's going to take some effort aligned throughout the district with our teacher leaders, our principals, our admin team at Central Services, and the support of the board. So that's my take on what you can do for us.
Thank you.
Great. Director Petrie?
Yeah, I want to follow up on that leadership issue. I was kind of curious, so I just went back and looked, and from 2003 to 2023, 20 years, we have had 8 superintendents. 8. I mean, you can do the math, that's not even 3 years for each person. And what happens when you have that much instability is that you have, to use the word that you used earlier, drift within the ranks. Because there is no top leadership that is establishing the standards and requiring people to meet them. And, I mean, if you think about a typical superintendent gets a 3-year contract. The reason it's a 3-year contract, they come in for the first year, they kind of figure out the lay of the land. In the second and third years, they start to make the changes that are going to turn the ship around. We just have not had anybody do that in 20 years. And so it is not, I hate seeing these numbers, but frankly, I'm not that surprised by them. And I for one am behind you, Dr. Funk, in making some systemic changes to turn these numbers around, because the MCAs do matter. I mean, I know that teachers look at FastBridge and some of these others, but the MCAs are how our community judges us and decides whether we're doing a good job educating our community's children. And so I'd like to see change.
Well, I'm not a Navy captain, so I'm not going to turn the ship around, but I'm an Army colonel, so I'll see what I can do.
Yes, Director Lauer?
I guess I'd just like to say, thanks for taking a look at this with this tone. I mean, it's hard to look at yourself, at your organization, and say, we've maybe fallen down on these issues, systemic issues. And obviously, supporting teachers, helping them be better at what they do is critical to getting better achievement. Obviously going forward, the job environment would tell me that, teachers, probably have choices. We want to be a supportive environment for them to be able to grow in their profession. And so, certainly we appreciate what they do. I keep going back, to go back a half an hour to the Lake Elmo numbers and how, I don't even think, I know, I'm sure there are things that you said that they're doing at a building level that are getting better results, but I think you take the Amigos Unidos out of there, and they're no different. They follow the exact same trends as the other schools. in the district. So whatever's going on there, whatever parental support those kids are getting, whatever extra help those students are getting, whatever attention to the structure of the learning that they're getting, something is good there. So somewhere to jump off and say, hey, how can we try to incorporate some of those ideas in the rest of what we're doing? But, yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Director Thielander?
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. Good, helpful, insightful information, obviously not ideal, but as Director Petrie said, not overly surprising. So, I think there's not gonna be any quick fixes, to, making systemic changes. It takes time. And, I think creating sustainable improvements to academics will be a process, and I'll also share the same vote of confidence with Dr. Funk in terms of the directional leadership that he has. And, but I think at this point in time, I think as a parent and as a school board member, I think we can and should expect more from our schools.
Expect more.
So, I think I would just, I think as the board, as we approach this from an informed oversight, from a governance perspective, I would just implore us as a board, just to continue to be a part of the solution and continue to find ways to focus on what we can control, and just making sure that, we are aligning resources and, creating the policies and practices, that continues to be best focused on student learning, as well as, supporting the educational system at all levels. It takes a concentrated, aligned effort to do that. So, I guess as we approach it from a board governance standpoint, and I would be open to other input from the board, and obviously Dr. Funk from you specifically, what benchmarks are going to be used, and, how often can we expect as a board to formally look at this data, and making sure that we're making progress to student learning outcomes. I love the idea of the cohort tracking. I think that with the colored chart, I think that's really helpful to get some insight from that standpoint. But also using multiple measures to demonstrate that student growth, which I think is important, not just one snapshot in time, but like you mentioned that, that student growth, what can we use to measure that?
I think that one of the things we've developed, what we're calling the pony plan, is we will have internally quarterly metrics that we will be looking at to see how our students are doing. And so with that, I don't know if it'll be at a quarterly basis, but at least will be a couple times a year. We will be updating the board on what we're seeing as far as internal metrics with the different programs that we have in place. And not just testing, but okay, if we realize that, in the data just showed it, where are we at as far as like cultural competency? And where's our staff trained in cultural competency, or what percentage of folks are? We're starting, we've hired some family engagement specialists this year that's different, that represent some different groups within our district. How are we effectively utilizing those specialists? But we have a number of action cards that the principals and the directors all went through today. And we will be checking on those cards throughout the year. So I think that there's a tie-in with that, so there is a plan out there in addition to, these fixes that were identified on the slide tonight. And so I think back to the governance piece, I think part of the board's role is, okay, where are you at, school district, with implementing this plan? So I hope that answers your question.
Anyone else? Thank you for the discussion here today. I think it's helpful. Just to comment, I think that these are always hard conversations, and I think everyone here we all have very mixed feelings about MCAs, right? Like, it's not an ideal situation. It's highly stressful for our teachers, for our students, for our building leadership. But it is what, I mean, Director Petrie said, it is how we are judged, it is how we are measured. And so it's something we have to pay attention to. It's teaching to the standards and kind of just having some system improvements. I'm also not surprised by these results at all. And that's why we have Dr. Funk, and it's gonna take time. This didn't come overnight, and it isn't gonna be corrected overnight. I'll say that, build on your stat, and I say this all the time, my son, who went through the system in 13 years, had 6 of those 8 superintendents. I mean, that's even in one educational career, he had 6. So we need to stay the course. We need to try to create some stability here. I would ask the community to partner with the district and with the board, with administration, because change is hard for people, and we have to do things differently. And, whether it's parent engagement or supporting teachers and staff, or supporting maybe some decisions you don't agree with that administration is gonna recommend to the board. We have to try something different to get a different result. Doing the same thing is just not gonna work. And so I look forward to seeing how best practices in certain buildings can be replicated elsewhere. And together with Dr. Funk, we'll schedule some learning sessions, some study sessions where we can get some more information. Because I do think that in the past, boards have tried to get into the management. And so our job is to really stay at that governance level and give the staff the time and the space to do what they need to do. But for staff to respect that the board has a very critical job in governance to do. And so that's a two-way street. So just thank you for everyone for tonight. And this is not the end of the meeting. I don't know if we need just a quick break for a few minutes to give everyone a chance to go to the restroom. Great, we'll take a quick break before we jump back into things. Thank you.
Okay.
They are, aren't they?
Great, we're going to come back to session here and continue with our agenda. We are on item C. Here, we're going to have a first reading of policy 613, graduation requirements, and Dr. Caleb Drexel Booth continues to stay.
Yes, happy to join you again. Thank you, Chair Sherman, directors of the board. We have a number of policies. The first one to look at is 613. This is a new policy for us, so I believe we'll go through a couple of readings. This comes to us directly out of MSBA again. We did have to make a few modifications. This policy governs graduation requirements at the high school. So when we look at definitions, MSBA policy referred to a credit as 1 full year of study. That is in alignment with how Minnesota Department of Education and legislation considers a credit. For us, a credit is measured as 1 semester of study, because we do have some courses that are just a half year long in length. So that was one change from MSBA policy. This policy goes into graduation assessments that are required, and then gets into the meat at Section 6, graduation credit requirements. So here we'll find the number of credits, number of semesters required to graduate. 8 credits are required of language arts, 6 credits of math. There is some language here that as we get legislation impacted some of the graduation requirements. Some of those changes don't impact students for a couple of years, and so we'll be revising this policy to reflect the future changes. I'll try to highlight some of those that come up, but this, the first one would be C. The new legislation strikes this. For now, it is still currently applicable to our students, so the Algebra 1 credit. For D, 6 credits of science, 1 credit of biology. I'm sorry, that should read 2 credits of biology because it's 1 full year is required. And then 2 credits of chemistry or physics. Students have to take a full year of chemistry or a full year of physics according to the legislation. And the C there should read 2 elective credits. This is one that will be changing in the future. There is a requirement for earth science for our students that will be freshmen in the year 25-26 school year. And then if we look at E, that should read 8 credits of social studies, not 8 1/2 credits. 2 credits in the arts, so a full year of arts. 1 credit, so 1 semester of health, and 1 semester of PE. Those are what we currently require within the registration guide. There will be an additional requirement for personal finance. Again, that will be coming in future years. And a clarification of citizenship and government course needs to be in the 11th or 12th grade year. So that will be forthcoming change as well. The
Caleb?
next, yeah.
Sorry, since we're talking about these requirements, are these from the model policy, or are they from, like, state statute, or are they Stillwater graduation credit? Where are these coming from?
The core language is both statute and MSB policy, so it's a copy.
Yep.
The numbers are specific to Stillwater. So again, if we look at E, social studies is a good example. So the state requires 3.5 credits. MSB policy reads 3.5 credits. Internal to Stillwater, we require 8 credits of social studies. So that it would be an extra semester that we currently require within our registration manual for graduation. Two reasons for that. Eighth grade is only half a year required of social studies in Stillwater. And years in 2010, when the new social studies standards came out, there was an inclusion of economics without adding to the required number of semesters. So many districts then started requiring 4 full years to account for that additional content area that was required without giving the requirement and the credits at the state level.
So then when we add civics in, how is that gonna?
We already require the course. It's,
Okay.
this legislation places it specifically in 11th or 12th grade.
Got it. Okay, so it's already worked in.
Yeah,
Okay,
that won't
good.
change the number of requirements.
Good, thank you.
Required credits.
So this, just because we're talking about credits, because as I was reading this, I don't recall a time when I've heard a discussion at the board level of what our requirements are and why. Is that something that we should be doing, or are these?
Yes, absolutely. The board should be establishing the graduation
Okay.
requirements.
Because I don't recall, unless someone else is aware, I don't recall this ever being looked at.
Yes.
So could we set some time aside to do that, and we can work together
Yep.
maybe to get that done? I don't know how that, if this is the time, or if that's a bigger, because I don't know what other districts are doing, how we
Well,
compare.
you typically do it in concert with your high school graduation requirement. I mean, so whatever, so I'm surprised that you don't have these at the policy level.
Yeah.
Because that's, how else are we determining what the grad requirements are?
Right.
At the, you know, so, yeah, I think the approach would be, here's what we do, here's our recommendations. And I think the timing on it would be, particularly if we're looking at maybe a 7-period or 4-period day or
Right.
something like that, that'd be the time
The
to
time.
take a look at the requirements.
Okay, so if we make a change, if we decide to make a change or
Right.
not, that's the time to,
That's what I would recommend.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Let's, I'll make note of that.
Yeah.
Joan, maybe you can make note of that too.
Yeah, but these numbers now reflect
Yes.
current practice at the high school.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Section, or J gets into all of the different substitutions that can be fulfilled. So you can meet some credits, some of the required credits through agricultural class, or a food class, or career tech ed classes, Project Lead the Way. So there's specific language around that. The substituting class must cover the standards, and so there needs to be documented evidence that the standards of that subject area are addressed. It's not simply, you took Project Lead the Way, therefore you get this credit. The course itself has to be aligned with the standards for that to happen.
So Caleb, along those lines, in number 6, ethnic studies course may fulfill social studies, language arts, math.
Yes.
Or science. That must be one heck of a class.
Well, it can be designed to meet, and so, for instance, our Ethnic and Cultural Studies Course 2, the second course, earns I believe, an English elective credit, because it is aligned with the English Language Arts standards.
Okay, so
It
we
may.
pick the class that it will
Exactly.
count for, not a kid could take this class for a math credit.
Exactly.
Got
It's
it.
not a choice of the student, it's a choice of the district
Got it.
and the
That
course.
makes more
Yeah,
sense.
so if
Thank
we
you.
had aligned, created the course to meet the social studies standards, it could get social studies credit.
Okay, that makes more sense,
Yep.
thanks.
Yep.
So should that be reworded in our policy then, to reflect that? Because I actually read it the same way.
Yes, I
That-
think it should.
Okay, to make sure that it's the district's choice.
In our policy, it's an English class.
Okay,
Yep. Or an English elective.
Yeah, and I think the first one is just a general elective, so it meets one of the 11 electives, but the second course is specific to language arts. I'd have to double check that for sure, but.
okay.
And the only other change we made is on B, academic standards in health, world languages, career tech education will be reviewed on a periodic basis. I believe the original says annual basis, and then there's an asterisk which says down below, Reviews are to be conducted on a periodic basis. Therefore, the time period may be changed to accommodate individual school district needs. So we won't be evaluating these subjects on an annual basis, but we'll do it on the curriculum improvement cycle, so on a periodic basis.
Okay, thank you.
So will that language change there too, or are you gonna keep the annual?
We will
With the
strike,
asterisk.
I would suggest striking annual and
Yeah. Oh,
replacing with periodic.
Excellent, thank you, that's much clearer.
So those changes will be made for our second review, and if you have any further changes, email them to, I guess, Caleb, and copy Dr. Funk. Any other immediate comments on that?
Ooh, question,
Oh,
hang on,
okay.
sorry. Where is this? Under section 5A, it's at the very top of that second page, or back of the first page, where it says like that we have a reasonable chance to succeed, or students will have a reasonable chance to succeed in career or college without the need for post-secondary remediation. Do we ever track that, like figure out which of our students graduate and then end up in remediated classes? If that is part of the policy, that it's an expectation for families and students to leave our schools and not have to go through remediation, do we ever track that?
There was a report a number of years ago, I haven't seen it since, that tracks students who are enrolled in the Minnesota State colleges and universities.
Okay.
I have not seen that report in a number of years, and it certainly didn't approach any students enrolled in a private or public institution outside of Minnesota.
Okay.
So other than that, we don't have a good tracking mechanism, other than, there are some tools like Naviance or some course and career planning tools that could be utilized, but I don't know that we have a systemic response to that.
Is that part of the model policy language then? Is
That might
where
be
that
something
came
we
from?
need to take a look at.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, because I would agree with you, that shouldn't be in there if we don't have a way to follow up or
Right.
track it. Okay. We'll move on to policy 601, school district curriculum.
So this was a policy that you had adopted in January, and then in looking at the legislative changes, we're recommending to bring in some MSB language into the policy. So you'll notice some clarification within the general statement of policy, really focusing on the language of the world's best workforce, adding some language in the definitions around a benchmark and academic standard and culturally sustaining, defining ethnic studies, experiential learning, and defining further performance measures. It moves the world's best workforce from 4 listed items up into the paragraph preceding it, so a little change there. And then section 4 addresses long-term strategic planning, which would be in line with our pony plan. As part of that, we did strike the profile of a Stillwater graduate that had been included in 601 to bring it in line with the district pony plan.
Can I ask just a question on we said world's best workforce. Is that how we have to refer to it, or would we want to change it? I know we've been trying to kind of rebrand that. Is
So,
that-
yeah, sorry.
Go
This
ahead.
isn't speaking to the committee. This is still speaking to the
so
language that the
is
state has
That is
used.
the actual
report.
Correct,
terminology,
yep.
okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Go ahead. Yeah, is there anything in here that was additional, or was added to it because of the new legislation? Or is this just bringing it up to date for the strategic plan?
Some of the definitions are added because of legislative action. I think C was one of those, defining culturally sustaining. Ethnic studies is new. I'm not sure about experiential learning. It very well might be. So it's a combination of utilizing MSBA language that was existing before and through their guidance, updating the policy with legislative changes.
I noticed that there's under the long-term strategic plan, the mention to assess and identify students for participation in gifted and talented programs. Was that part of the legislation, or is that just
I think that's
our general
model
language?
policy.
Okay,
Yep.
got it, thank you.
Any questions on that? If not, again, send comments to Dr. Funk and Caleb. And then we'll move on to School District System Accountability Policy 616.
Yep, and so this is a policy that we technically have by number. This is a delete all, replace with MSBA model policy. So this gets into some of the accountability systems and reports that we conduct. Policy 603 establishes what we used to refer to as the World's Best Workforce Committee. Legislation generally speaks to it as the District Advisory Council. We, last year, started using the language District Learning Advisory Council because it really does focus on the learning side of the district, looking at curriculum and assessments and instruction. And so we wanted to highlight that in the title. But anywhere you see District Advisory Council in this policy, it's referencing World's Best Workforce or the District Learning Advisory. So it speaks to the goal-setting process that we engage in. This you would see reflected in our action planning, and the pony plan is referenced within this. A system for reviewing and revising curriculum and instruction, that speaks to what we have in policy, I believe 604, around a process to do that work. Implementation of graduation requirements, which references back to 613. So this is a policy that kind of helps, I guess, connect dots between different policies and continues to give guidance to that district learning advisory, specifying some of the work and timeline. So under D, comprehensive continuous improvement, it does specify a date by which the district learning advisory council will review the action plans, the World's Best Workforce Plan, the district literacy plan, some of those components. And then it references continued work connecting assessment, reporting, and growth.
I just had one question on here, and it was kind of, I think, through the lenses I was looking at the MCA scores. Under D4, and it talks about translation services. Is that something that, it just says, appropriate and practical? Can you explain, do we do that often, or how, do we have like an internal procedure for when that happens, or?
So there's a few tools at our disposal for translation services. This would be, we do send out to translate materials, whether through our internal interpreters or outside vendors. So we will translate formal documents, especially ones that aren't updated frequently.
Okay.
We do have language line, telephone translation, and bring in interpreters. And there is a feature that is brand new this year that allows parents and families to select the language in which they want to receive information. And so there are some translation services available through that communication tool.
Okay. And that would, I was gonna say, you go ahead. No, you go ahead. Are you gonna ask a different question altogether?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll just keep going.
Finish your
Hold on one
question.
second. Does that include, that's not, you're talking about anything, like district communications? Or is
So-
that curriculum?
I believe it's called Bright Arrow.
Right, so
And-
it's really the way that we send email, text
Yep.
messages, or voicemail messages. People can prefer, or select a preferred language, and then that message can go out through that language. Now, it's a automated system. I haven't heard yet how accurate the translations are, so that's something we'll have to be working with families to identify, but it does allow us to be able to translate those communications that you get So, your principal sends out a notice about something, the school newsletter, all those different pieces, have that ability to be transmitted.
But it wouldn't be like down to a teacher level at this point,
It is
newsletter?
a teacher level,
Okay.
Bright Arrow is used by our teachers as well. It's
Okay,
really part of
perfect.
the Power School tool,
Okay.
so they can send out messages that way.
So the intent is, I would like to replicate our family and engagement specialists as much as we can throughout the district. And then we will be utilizing folks we can touch base with on every day who can really translate better for us and-
Okay.
and meet the needs. I think the key language in that number 4 there, to the
Yeah.
extent appropriate and practicable.
Right. Great. It was just more of my own curiosity in looking at some of the achievement gaps we had from the MCI. I was just curious. Thank you.
So I had a question. At the bottom of the page, that first page, under C2, that last line talks about indicators of achievement, and prior achievement must be based on highly reliable statewide or district-wide assessments. So my question was, first of all, do all of our assessments meet that highly or highly reliable? And is there a list? Like, how do you determine if a test is reliable or not? I mean, I'm assuming MCAs are fine because they're state.
Right.
But all the other ones that we use, how do we decide if they're the right ones?
Yeah, so the other assessments that we use primarily, I would say, would be FastBridge. And the Department of Education has published a list of screening tools that are valid, reliable, and able to be used. FastBridge is on that list. So that is certainly not only allowable, but approved for the purposes in the READ Act. And then we do utilize NWA MAP, which is nationally recognized as an effective and highly reliable and valid tool. And then we use the COGAT assessment as well for identifying gifted learners, which also has national studies of effectiveness.
Great, thanks. Any other questions?
I have one
Oh, yeah.
question. I'm sorry, I have to take you back a little bit.
Yeah.
It's policy 601.
Yeah.
The general statement of the policy states, the policy of the school district is to establish the world's best workforce in which all learning in the school district should be directed and for which all school district learners should be held accountable. Can you explain that? And is there a procedure for the accountability part of it? The learners should be held accountable.
Right, so I think what that suggests, because I think later in the graduation requirement policy, 613, it speaks to students on an IEP and them needing to be held to the same expectations as identified within the standards-based IEP. So it's saying the standards of Minnesota create the conditions for the world's best workforce. All students need to be held accountable to the same rigorous standards without exception, without going, through process.
Any questions on policy 616? And again, this is just a first read, so we'll see changes, and please read them and just send an email to Dr. Funk and Caleb, and those can be accounted for in the next read. Our last policy introduction here is policy 722, public data request. And I think we're gonna change to Bob. Mr. Graff.
Good evening, everyone. Last policy in this section, the 722, the public data request. Some of the changes, we're looking at an annual review instead of a 3-year review, with the requirement that we make the policy available publicly, which we do already on our website. The policy goes and adds some clarity around definitions that are important, and it also provides some clarity around what we can and cannot do with respect to charging people for the materials that they request, the types of materials that we can provide or should provide, and then some definitions that were, let me pull it up here, clarity around how we can, what we can request of the requester of the data. So we can't ask questions as to the purpose of why they're asking for these things or their names and so on and so forth, right? So other than that, it's largely follows what we've already had, just some.
Very legally driven. So, any questions for Mr. Graff? Great, okay, that was easy. And for this one, please send your comments to Dr. Funk and Mr. Graff. All right, so now we're going to move on to our strategic direction B, which is foster a safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment for all staff and students. And our report is going to be the summer 2023 long-term facility maintenance accomplishments. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair Sherman, members of the board. Tonight I just want to update you on our summer long-term facility maintenance, or LTFM, projects that we just completed. The projects that we completed last summer or a couple weeks ago were part of the fiscal year 2024 project list. So not the one that was approved just a couple months ago in June, but last June, summer of 2022. So just to highlight some of the guidelines before we go into this project specifically, is we just tried to continue the maintenance and improvement of each of our district buildings, provide updated learning spaces as we remodel them to meet the needs of our students and users. We strive to reduce our energy consumption by replacing aging and outdated equipment, and then look to provide accessible facilities for all our users, replacing non-compliant elements, which you'll see some of those that we had here in some of our buildings. So to start out with, we had the early childhood building, and you'll kind of see just a list of what we did at the building, and then some pictures that go along with it. So at the early childhood building, we replaced the worn carpet in the entryway, and replaced that fall surface on the playground there. The fall surface, that was the first one that was in place in 2013 when the building was built. So that was replaced for the first time here at an early childhood building. As we moved to Afton Lakeland, we replaced the doors and the office walls in the media center. There's 3 or 4 offices there in the media center that we did those to. Replaced 2 of our original toilet rooms. Replaced a fire door, an interior fire door, and then seal coated the playground play surface. Brookview, we had to replace the kitchen flooring to comply with the Department of Health regulations, so we had to remove the current flooring that was in there and put a different flooring in there this summer. At Lilly, there's quite a bit of work done there. So first was we replaced our interior finishes in the special ed and kindergarten classrooms, and that includes doors, paint, carpet, lights, marker boards, casework, sinks, etc. Within the kindergarten rooms, they had a restroom in the kindergarten room, so that was replaced as well. We replaced 2 of our original toilet rooms in the building, replaced exterior doors and hardware. The roof over the gym and the main office area, that's the slope roof, and we added insulation to bring that roof up to our current energy code that it wasn't before. There was a lot of ice damming happening on that roof, more specifically around the main entrance doors that became dangerous. So we were able to replace that roof. Replaced the exterior pavement around the playground, replaced the playground equipment, and then installed the rubberized play surface. That was not LTFM, but it was part of the playground project. The rubberized surface was part of the bond in 2015, so there were a couple playgrounds left. This one here, Rutherford next summer has replaced that we'll finish up the bond dollars to put the rubberized surface in there as well. So I just wanted to point that out. With that, Oak Park, we replaced the failing concrete around the outside of the building, and then replaced the original drinking water inside. And then we will start the ALC project. We have a kickoff meeting next week, and the ALC part of the remodel, some of that is capital dollars, some of that will be LTFM dollars, but the ALC project remodel will start in October with a spring completion. So we'll get pictures of that once that's done. Moving on to Rutherford, we replaced the failing exterior sealant around the gymnasium, painted some exterior doors, and then replaced 2 of the rooftop mechanical units. Stonebridge, again, is another building that had considerable work within the classrooms, replaced the interior finishes, again, similarly with the casework, sinks, marker boards, lights, technology, whatever. This is a 4-year project that we're replacing all the classrooms. So we wrapped up year 3. Next summer in the FY25 projects will be the 4th year of the last classrooms that we have to replace. Replaced 2 of our original toilet rooms, kind of adjacent to those classrooms that we remodeled. Provided drinking fountains with bottle fills in the classroom areas, provided an ADA toilet, and then replaced 3 of the exterior doors and hardware around the building. Oakland Middle, we had provided an ADA restroom, or ADA toilet, and then installed new insulation to stop cold air intrusion and improve the comfort in the health office. There was some drafts that made that a little chilly there in the Oakland Middle School. Stillwater Middle School, the top picture is the door that we added for an egress based from the fire marshal orders that we had to add a door in that area. Replaced the interior finishes and lighting in our band and choir rooms, and also replaced the sound panels for improved acoustics. We replaced 2 exterior doors and hardware, and then there were quite a few interior doors and hardware that were replaced around the building within Stillwater Middle. And then lastly, at the high school, the auditorium got new seating and carpet. The corridor has new ceiling and lights. This is a multi-year project that we did different phases. We started in the downtown, or the downstairs, or the first floor of the high school, and now we're working in the second floor to replace the ceiling and lighting in the hallways. Repair some of the cracks in the parking lot, and then repair some of the failing sidewalks and the steps around the site, more specifically in the back by the bus doors. So with that, just kind of wanted to just highlight on some of the things that we did and open up to any questions or comments that you may have.
Yes. Going back to the Oak Park one,
Yeah.
if the ALC isn't done till spring, does that mean that we as a board continue on the roadshow until spring?
Correct.
Oh, okay. As fun as it is going to all these schools, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Once we get
Thanks.
closer to finish, we'll get a time where we can get back in there, but for now, the traveling
So
roadshow
all winter.
continues.
Excellent, thanks.
So I just wanted to bring something up because I hear about it in the community. Can we talk a little bit about bathroom remodeling? We're not doing anything different than we've done, I mean, I'm assuming in past years. Could you maybe just speak, I just want to offer some clarification. I know we talked about it in our meeting when this was all approved, that it was for ADA compliance reasons that we're doing this, and it's a design that we've used in other buildings, correct?
So it started about 3 years ago. We tried to do, we have single stall restrooms with a common hand washing station. And so there's restrooms at Stonebridge, at Lily Lake, at Brookview, and we started at Afton this year. As we started to go through the projects here and we had some of our reviews, they have a couple different versions of those restrooms. They have what they call universal restrooms, universal toilets, where you have single stalls, depending on the size of it. Sometimes there's 4, sometimes there's 5, there's 6, depending on the size of the restroom. And you have your single stall. Think of it like, if you can go back to one of the pictures, kind of think of it like you're at the mall or you're at a restaurant that has a single stall restroom there.
Right.
And then you come out to a common hand washing station. If you go to Lily Lake, real quick. So the one on the bottom there, that's what they call a universal restroom. So you kind of have there's 6 individual stalls there, and you come out to a common hand washing station. That's what they call a universal.
Yeah.
They also have what they call enhanced privacy restrooms, where, think about it, where you go into the boys and girls restroom, you kind of open up the door and you go into the restroom, like you go in, there's the hand washing station, and then you go into the urinals or the private stalls, wherever you're at in the bathroom. Similarly, that's what they call enhanced restrooms. So you open up a door, there's a boys' restroom and a girls' restroom, you open up a door, you go into the hand washing station that looks similar to that picture there, and then you go into your privacy stall or your privacy separate room. So based on the feedback that we got for our review in order to get our permitting, we needed to have a balance between universal restrooms and enhanced privacy restrooms. So the ones we did at Afton Lakeland, there's 2 of them, they're enhanced privacy. So one is a boy, one is a girl restroom. At Stonebridge and Lily Lake, they have 4 of those areas. 2 of them are considered universal, that looks like the picture there, and then 2 of them are enhanced privacy, 1 boy, 1 girl for enhanced privacy, so there's a combination of both.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I know that there's been some conversation in the community, and I mean, I'm thrilled with the way they look, and I think it offers, dignity for our students with maybe some special needs that want some additional privacy, and balances out well in the school, and,
Well, quite honestly, it's enhanced privacy for everybody.
yeah, absolutely. Yep. It is.
Yeah, I will just say totally anecdotally, like having kids in elementary school, bathrooms are a really big deal. And it's a real high anxiety for a lot of kids. So having these individual stalls, has been a godsend in our family at least. So.
Yeah, and it's very similar to what you would see out in the public space right now, so I appreciate you providing that background and context, so. Any other questions?
I don't know that we've gotten this sort of a report before about what's happening during the summer, and I appreciate it.
I do too. The pictures are great.
Yeah, rather than just getting it a year in advance, it's nice to sort of wrap it up here and see the photos of what's actually happened, so thank you.
It's something we want to do on a more regular basis moving forward.
It's great, and it's great for the community to be able to see it when they're not maybe in the schools or they're curious what's going on, so I really appreciate it. And I do have to say, and I say this almost at every meeting, and I know it's you and a bunch of people that you're responsible for, but our buildings, the best part about touring is how well maintained they are. Like, I'm walking into the high school today, and it's amazing to me, the hard work that our custodians, the pride of work, just everything. So kudos, whether it's something big like the long-term facility maintenance or just the day-to-day, it's very impressive, so thank you.
We have a great team that really
Yes,
takes pride in
we
their
do.
work.
We're fortunate, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we have a couple, we're gonna move on to the strategic direction C. Utilize systems and align resources in an efficient manner to support learning. Our action item this evening is master contract with St. Croix Paraprofessional Association. So we're gonna welcome Mr. Graff back.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to announce that we have an agreement with our para contract. After a lot of work, I would like to acknowledge my para colleagues for all of the time that they've had to endure leadership changes with myself and my colleague Marie and her predecessors, and it's just been a long time. And I'm very thankful that they were as, I'm just very thankful for that group of people. They're great individuals. They worked hard. There was some frustration that was out of their control. But we came to a conclusion, and I'm very happy with it, and I'm looking forward to working with that group again.
Great.
And it was done within the board parameters. Sorry, I was supposed to say that.
Which is always a plus.
Any
right?
questions?
Any questions for Mr. Graff? Great. I will make a motion to approve the master contract. Can I get a second?
Second.
Great. Director Lauer with the second to approve the St. Croix Paraprofessional Association Master Contract 2022 through 2024. With a first and a second, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you so much for all your work, all Marie, countless people, I'm sure, that get their hands involved, obviously, Dr. Funk, everyone, so thank you. And now, Mr. Graff, you're gonna
All
stick
right.
around. You've
Now
got
we
some
have-
policy work.
We have 3 quick policies.
Yeah, the
They're all new
license.
policies for
Yeah,
us
all new
here, so this
policies,
is.
first read, and let's start with the license status.
Okay. Pretty straightforward. It's just providing the guidance of how to maintain the license. The responsibility is on the individual teacher to maintain their license, but there are district-wide responsibilities for maintaining records that are appropriate to be able to demonstrate that these teachers are licensed within our district. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Just you need to have a license to be able to teach here, and there are penalties if you don't have a license. And the school district is responsible for making sure that our teachers are licensed.
So this is going back to a first read. So I don't know if anyone had any questions. It's really pretty straightforward. But if you have any comments or questions, we can do that now.
I just had a general question. What prompted bringing up this new policy? I mean, I'm glad we are having this policy. I'm surprised we haven't had it before. But is there new legislation or like what?
I don't honestly know.
Okay.
I don't honestly know why this is a quote new policy for us. We have policies that dictate that you have to be licensed and to be a teacher here, so I'm not exactly certain.
I think there's some new PELSB requirements that are part of it,
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
including, you have to, all new teacher hires and terminations, including layoffs, and by race and ethnicity, and then reasons for resignations and requested leaves of absence. They haven't asked for that level of data before.
Okay. Thank you.
One question.
Yes.
So the licensing is a state process, and so it's between the state and the teacher. Do we have anything that goes above and beyond that as far as a requirement for our teachers on an ongoing?
When you say above and beyond, what do you mean?
Each teacher has-
Requirements for
Teachers
teaching.
are required to have 125 hours every 5 years of professional development, continuing education, and there's certain parameters that they have to get within that 125 hours. Reading, cultural competency, I think some mental health pieces. So it's incumbent upon the teacher to do it. And internally in the district, there's a licensure committee that reviews the 125 hours that they have to sign off on before the teacher can get the license renewed.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Great. All right, again, send your feedback to Mr. Graff and Dr. Funk. We're gonna move on to the next policy, which is policy 516.5, overdose medication.
Okay, again, a new policy, putting guidelines in place for the schools to be supplying, or to have on hand, rather, the Narcan, the opiate antagonist, in case it's needed. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more instances where something like this is saving lives and is needed. So now we're required to have it at the schools. So the policy is providing the structure around what is needed, who can administer it, and the kind of the hierarchy of administration. We've got this implemented. Dr. Lee is here with us, who oversees this program through his area out at the schools. But basically, it's putting this in place so that we have it available, unfortunately, if it's needed.
Great. Any questions on this?
Yeah, one question on that one. So, I did read a little bit on that one, and so the part of it is what defines a school building, you know? Does the rec center have to have it? Do you have it somewhere else? But maybe that's not even such an issue. What does one dose cost, and does it last forever or for a year?
I'm going to refer to my colleague, Paul, if he can speak to that. I don't have the cost associated with it. But there are guidelines about, you know, how you keep it refrigerated or preserved, and the timeline, so there are due dates on it as well, but I don't know the specifics.
About the, remind me of the question.
Well, so is it a significant cost that we really need to worry about how much we have where? Okay.
No, it's not a significant cost.
Okay.
To buy the units. We have 2 supplied in every building. It's not a significant cost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on. And again, feel free, this is just a first read. We'll bring it back a couple more times. The last policy that we're going to discuss is the first reading for policy 708, and that's transportation of non-public students.
Yeah, so again, a new policy for us. We do have a transportation policy. This one is very specific to non-public students, and our responsibility as a district for engaging and transporting individuals, even if they are not students within our district or within our school system, right? But if they live in our geographical area, we have a responsibility to be transporting them, and the payment or the exchange is with the schools where the student is ultimately attending. But basically, it's outlining the guidelines for their special education needs, students without special education needs, our responsibility for transporting them, even where they live. So,
Great.
and it's been implemented, Mark has it fully in place. So.
Great. Are there any questions on this one? Again, this is just a first read, so if you have questions, feel free to share them with Dr. Funk, and he can get it to either Mark or Bob. And then our last report tonight is under the strategic direction D, develop strong partnerships with the communities we serve. And we're gonna have Carissa join us for a referendum update.
Good evening, members of the board, Superintendent Funk. I'm happy to share some information with you about the bond. At each board meeting leading up to the election in November, we'll provide a little bit of information for you and for the public to better understand what is being proposed as part of the bond. The last meeting, we did kind of a general overview, and we talked about the three main areas that are being addressed. One being we have a lot of growth in our district and we need more room. Another is we have older buildings, two that are over 100 years old that need to be replaced. And the one I'm focusing on tonight is security improvements. So back in 2013, if you were around at that time, you remember we had a bond election that did a lot for security. We actually put the secured entrances in all of our buildings, so you have to kind of walk through the door and push the buzzer and get buzzed in. But there's more that can be done always. Security is certainly something that we are very focused on. It's important to have schools that are safe and that are keeping our students and our staff secure. One of the things that the bond would allow us to do is add security strobe lights. That is a light that would show up for people if they're in a loud, noisy environment. Think of a cafeteria, a music room, even outside where kids are playing on a playground or out in gym class. There would be a security light that would flash so people know something's going on. Probably in a lockdown situation, something like that would happen to keep kids from going back into a building if there was a situation happening, or just alerting them if, again, they were in a high noise area. Also talked about adding security glazing to some of the windows. A lot of that was done in the 2013 bond, but there are additional areas where we can add that security glazing to just try to prevent someone from getting in with force. And the biggest part of it is here in this building. For those of you who are familiar with this building, if you come in during the day through that crowded little main office, it gets incredibly congested. It creates some security issues, as well as just being able to have staff in that area. There's one person sitting at a desk with lots and lots of people coming by throughout the day. So being able to remodel that area in a way that gives us more staff members, more eyes, keeping track of what's happening, better visibility, and just a more welcoming and secure entryway. So I'm going to show you just a really quick little video to give you an idea of what we're talking about. This will be up on our website and shared with the community as well, and then I'll take any questions.
That's insane.
Just one other thing to point out, we did put in your folders tonight some copies of a one-pager about the bond. We've had some questions from board members as you're out talking to people. By all means, feel free to share that information. If you are one who's out and about a lot and need more copies, let us know. We'll definitely get those to you. We're sharing that information at community meetings. We'll have them available at the school buildings for a lot of events that are coming up. We have posters around the schools. Our website is a great source of information, and we're doing a lot just to get things out in school newsletters and anywhere we can to make sure people really understand what this bond is about.
And when's early voting starting?
Early voting starts September 22nd, so it's coming up. And information about how to vote early or at the polls is on our website as well.
The website is really such a great space for useful information, so I would encourage the community members to go there. I love the FAQ section and that it keeps getting added to it. So even just going back multiple times to visit, I've noticed that it's just, I love how those questions are being added and addressed proactively, so. And thank you for the video. I think it's nice to put that visual with what we would be doing. The high school entryway here is insane for as large as this high school is. It is like a closet. So just seeing that, it really is more impactful than you can describe if you haven't been here.
If you really want to see it come during
Yeah.
the start of the day when kids are coming back and forth, it's wild.
It is wild. It's so small. So definitely something that needs to be addressed from a safety standpoint. So any other comments or questions for Carissa while she's here? Great.
Thank you.
That is it. Carissa, you end the show here. So. Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.